Welcome back. Today we're going to be covering an article that was sent to me by a subscriber. The article happens to fall in quite well with the article I previously covered on the US educational system, i.e. there being some students demanding safe spaces and segregation from white students. This one, however, is a little different, in that it's part of a bill called the Higher Education and Research Bill, where there are segments of it that encourage rating systems to be taken on board and would essentially allow for students to bully universities into their demands. But of course, for this to make more sense, we are going to cover the article and the parts of the bill that are relevant to the article. Now, just before we get into that, I do want to do something. I want to shill a channel. Most of you know my intro is rather wet. It was made for me as a gift, along with the outro, not the audio though, that's something else entirely, by Devil's Advocate. He's another rational mind on YouTube, and I would very much like it if you'd go and subscribe to him. He makes some very good content, and I really enjoy it. Now let's get into this article. Universities warned over Snowflake student demands. What I really like about this title to the article is that Snowflake features. Many of us content creators have been calling very delicate people who espouse very nonsensical ideas as snowflakes, and the fact it's hit the mainstream media and is being used even in quotations to me is great. Universities will be forced to pander to the demands of snowflake students if controversial changes to the ranking system are approved, education leaders have warned. The government faces a cross-party revolt in the Lords this week over proposed reforms to higher education, which include placing student satisfaction at the heart of a new ranking system. When I first read this article, the first thing that struck me was the fact that student satisfaction was considered important. Yes, you do to an extent want to make sure the best lecturers are there. Yes, you want to make sure the best facilities are available on campus, like a library and a bar, because let's face it, we all need to drink after spending several hours trying to memorize one tiny little equation. But outside of the basics, what you need to do as well as you can, I don't see a reason to give students that kind of power. The kind of power where if they feel they are threatened or their ideas are being challenged, they can threaten to give you a terrible rating until you give in to them. It's like the Yelp reviewer from that South Park episode. Do as I say, or you get 1 star or no stars. However, I can't imagine many professors could be jaffed to put any boogers and cum in their students' exam papers. Now, another interesting point I want to raise is that this has gotten to the House of Lords, which means it has already gotten through Parliament. Parliament thinks this is good. They think this is a clever idea to give students more of an influence over their education. Now, this is higher education, not basic education, which is good because if this happened at the lower levels, I think parents would go insane. I think it would cause more problems. As if this isn't enough, but then again, with students paying $9,000 a year, I guess they want to lash out a little. Put their identities front and center and use it as a way to sway universities to ban people from speaking, to use it to create spaces away from other people, create exclusionary zones or safe spaces. Make it so that the university openly discriminates against other groups under the guise of it being for the greater good, for equality. Quite a common talking point about the House of Lords is that it is often considered antiquated and filled with old fuddy-duddies who don't really understand the goings-on of normal England or the United Kingdom. In this instance, we are fortunate because they're seeing through the bullshit, and it's highly likely they are going to stall this until it is amended. If we're lucky, it'll be amended so that students are not granted the level of power, or certainly this level of power, because if the House of Lords permits this to go through unchallenged without slapping any amendments onto it to restrict the amount of power or the circumstances that would permit students to vote in a certain way with regards to their satisfaction, it would allow some students to abuse the system, which we all would have given the opportunity to suit our needs much like theirs. They would use it to no platform those they feel threatened by. They would threaten the very idea of free speech by stopping people from attending. On a slight tangent, not so long ago I got into an argument with someone at my old university. The argument was about no platforming somebody who was going to speak or potentially speak at the university. I disagreed with them. I felt that person should speak or be allowed to speak if they ever did speak at the university. This person disagreed and was a member of the student union, and they pushed hard to make sure this happened. I attended this university 10 years earlier, and when asked what I thought a safe space was, I said it was the university. They disagreed and said that a safe space needed to be something away from that person, and that person challenging anyone's ideas because of how offensive some of their ideas were was a good enough reason to keep that person away from the university. And at one point during our very heated disagreement, they did in fact list off their identities, which included trans, non-binary, asexual, aromantic, trans disabled, and there was something else. But quite frankly, when they said trans non-binary, I told them they lost the argument. That successfully triggered them. I want people to be challenged. I want people to understand what that person is thinking, so they can either challenge that person, challenge their own ideas, or look to improve upon themselves if anything that person said they agree with. I know that was quite a long tangent, and this has itself been quite a long-winded speech, so to speak. But I did feel it was relevant to get this out of the way now, because at some point soon I'm going to have to go through part of that bill, and I'm almost certain it's going to be a better sedative than my own voice. It is feared that this will lead to a fantastically dangerous culture where authorities will give in to student demands, however unreasonable they may be. Safe space and no platform movements have swept across campuses, including a campaign to ban Germaine Greer from giving a speech over her offensive comments. All those 2 paragraphs do is confirm what I have already said, my own concerns with regards to this bill. I do want to highlight banning Germaine Greer, a very devout feminist, makes me laugh. I don't agree with it, but it makes me chuckle nonetheless. Baroness Wolfe, a professor at King's College London, warned, universities are increasingly nervous about doing anything that will create overt dissatisfaction among students because they are being told that student satisfaction is key. It has had a real effect on the willingness of universities to stand up to the student demands, which in the past have been removing statues, safe spaces, and no platforming. This whole movement is a direct threat to academic standards and the ability of universities to stand up for freedom of speech. This is where universities are reaching a very difficult crossroads. They either take student satisfaction to heart and actually use it to create a better environment, or a perceived better environment, or they double down and stand by what they believe to be correct. For example, when students demand Kant and Plato be removed from a philosophy syllabus because they're white, do you remove them and replace them with someone of colour who said something similar that is relevant to that course? Or do you just tell them to shut the fuck up? You're doing a degree in pondering, a style of thinking. Yes, okay, for one moment there I was critical of philosophy, but I did chemistry. Give me a break. My best friend did a philosophy degree. It drives me insane. My point here is that a group of students who have chosen a university, have been accepted by that university to study that degree, are demanding the entire syllabus be changed or reformed to accommodate their views, because they believe they know what's better for them than what has already been set out by the syllabus itself. I'm all for reform when it's needed, but in this instance you want to take out some of the greatest philosophers and simply erase them from the syllabus because of the colour of their skin. Oh, and before we continue, Plato is Greek. How many Greeks do you know are actually white? Kant I can somewhat understand being Prussian, but not Plato. And even then it's not a valid excuse to want to have them removed from the syllabus. Their ideas should stand on their own. You do have to wonder in this instance, say that bill gets through, and a university is put in the position of removing Plato and Kant to appease students they know will give them a poor rating for not being satisfied because their needs are not being met, whether the university would do it or not. She added, the student satisfaction measure is fantastically dangerous. The way to make students happy is not asking them to do any work and giving them a high grade. So to better understand the term student satisfaction measure, we should now have a look at the Higher Education and Research Bill summary and expand on some of the areas that are relevant. University Alliance is broadly supportive of the Higher Education and Research Bill. The university sector has undergone huge transformation in recent years, and we need legislation that is appropriate for the way it now operates. We welcome the duty on the new Office for Students to promote participation as well as access and support a stronger focus on teaching excellence. We would, however, like a further duty to promote collaboration as well as competition between providers in the student interest. The proposed legislation would allow the Office for Students to encroach on institutional autonomy. Its powers should be limited. The Office for Students should also ensure the financial sustainability of the whole sector. Now, these are the ones that are relevant to this entire article, and I feel it only right to have a quick look at some of the key points and also understand the definition of institutional autonomy. So first we scroll to page 2 and point 8. As the organisation responsible for regulating the higher education sector, the Office for Students will need to ensure that institutions operate in the interest of students. This includes assuring a basic standard of quality and financial stability, both of which are totally fine. But how does the Office for Students ensure that institutions operate in the interest of students? Well, obviously they're going to have to reach out to students, because they need to know what's best for students by talking to them, which is where the satisfaction ratings come into it. The next point that kind of stands out, and I say kind of because it's quite a weak one by comparison to a few of the others, is point 10 on page 3. We welcome provisions in the Higher Education and Research Bill that promote participation as well as access and support a stronger focus on teaching excellence. I'm so happy you welcome this, but if ratings are involved, I can promise you 1 or 2 students are going to be massive cunts. And if they are massive cunts, as anticipated, it will certainly make it hard for you to increase competition between existing higher education providers while lowering the bar for new entrants. Since all the good lecturers will be getting low ratings, I assume you intend to do something about it. I'm just hypothesizing and yeah. The next point that stands out is point 17. We are concerned that the bill allows for the Office for Students to encroach upon institutional autonomy. Since the Office for Students is to be more at arm's length from the sector than Higher Education Funding Council for England, it is even more important that its powers are limited. Now, for those that don't know what institutional autonomy is, it is something mentioned in the 1988 Magna Carta Universitatum, where it states, "The university is an autonomous institution at the heart of societies, differently organized because of geography and historical heritage. It produces, examines, appraises, and hands down culture by research and teaching. To meet the needs of the world around it, its research and teaching must be morally and intellectually independent of all political authority and intellectually independent of all political authority and economic power." I think we've reached the point where the part of the bill that is certainly getting a lot of attention is very much now apparent, in that when you have institutional autonomy being challenged by politics, it's a problem. And you can say it's not, because the Office for Students has limited powers, but student satisfaction and ratings will challenge how the institution runs, which means that institutional autonomy is not there anymore and the university's very strength is being challenged. They're not there to be politically motivated, but those that would look to deplatform, those that would look to create safe spaces, lean a particular way. Meaning that universities' value, their very integrity, is utterly worthless. They are not free from political motivation. They are not free from the economic nonsense on the outside. They are instead being bullied, and have the potential to be bullied, which is why there are people who are concerned. This will reduce standards and undermine quality. I just think this is totally mad and destructive of everything universities stand for. Professor Julia Black, Interim Director at London School of Economics, Baroness Wolfe, Baroness Deach, a former senior proctor at University of Oxford, and Gil Evans, an emeritus professor at Cambridge University, told the Telegraph of their concerns. The Higher Education and Research Bill, championed by Universities Minister Joe Johnson, will reach committee stage in the Lords on Monday, where it is expected to be subjected to a barrage of criticism. Now, I know a few of you might say to me that it's good that students have a say on how a university is run. I agree to an extent, which is where I think the limitation on the powers is important. important, but how they're limited hasn't been specified. Some of you may also point out and question whether or not those names already mentioned are being themselves politically motivated to retain a certain thing in an old traditional way because they're regressive as fuck, or because they're just politically motivated. And to an extent, again, I could agree, but without hard evidence, it is redundant. And finally, before we continue, yes, Joe Johnson is the younger brother to Boris Johnson. The person championing this bill is the brother to Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is, quite frankly, the funniest politician ever to grace this country's parliament. He's such a bumbling fool, I love it. Sir Keith Burnett, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Sheffield, told the Sunday Telegraph, "It is clear that members of the House of Lords are deeply concerned about the long-term future and sustainability of universities, and this is true across parties. The bill outlines the proposed teaching excellence framework where universities will be awarded gold, silver or bronze medals on the basis of a range of factors including student satisfaction, teaching excellence and preparation for the world of work. Universities are currently ranked based on quality of research output." Jill Evans, Emeritus Professor of Medieval Theology at Cambridge University, said the new criterion will lead to an attitude among university authorities of bother the kids, but we had better give in as we stand to suffer more for fighting it out. It will lead to a feeling of, if in doubt, give in, she added. Okay, so now I feel is the right time to address the Teaching Excellence Framework by reading a passage from it. Teaching excellence matters not only for students and taxpayers, but also for social mobility, helping to address inequality by allowing students to fulfill their aspirations and progress onto their chosen careers. The Teaching Excellence Framework, TEF, will for the first time link the funding of teaching to quality, not simply quantity. This will work by assessing providers on the quality of teaching and outcomes they achieve, taking into account factors such as student satisfaction, employment outcomes, and retention rates. Providers that excel will be able to increase their fees in line with inflation. All the providers are assessed, their award ratings will be published so that applicants have clear information about where teaching is outstanding, allowing them to make better choices about where they choose to study. Now for me, when you have employment outcomes and retention rates linked with student satisfaction, certainly when you have students that will go out of their way to ban people from events based on their gender or race, white and male being the prominent and preferred, students that will go out of their way to try and have statues defamed or removed because they are offensive to them or not inclusive enough for whatever label they've decided to adopt on the day. The same students who are most likely still outside Downing Street, bitching about the results from last year's referendum. It is not current year, last current year. It is now just current year. Get back to school and start learning. I am very sorry if I bleated on a bit too much for this, but it was rather difficult to contain my own annoyance. And if I remember to, I'll add my own little personal thoughts, kind of rantish, off-the-cuff bit at after the outro. So thank you all for listening.
Well, here's the thing. That almost goes back in the late 80s, early 90s when I started hearing about the very idea that children who were disciplined by their parents could call the cops and report child abuse. even for something as simple as a fucking spank.
Oh, that was parodied in The Simpsons, wasn't it?
I think it was, but that's just the thing. It's like when you give the subordinates power over the leadership, that fucks up the entire dynamic, and nothing's going to get done. There's exactly jack fucking shit that can get accomplished when you make it where these idiot-ass children who don't know shit go into college to learn shit, and then they can give their teachers shit. The teachers are going to be too afraid to teach them anything.
That is a big concern. They're going to be concerned about teaching them ideas that would be, to them students, radical or too challenging for them. And this is where it doesn't float with someone, certainly from what I did at my own perspective at uni when I did a hard science. You can't get away with that shit with a chemistry professor because it doesn't work. Oh, you challenged my idea of gender in biology. Okay, what now?